What exactly is the 7th Infinity Stone? The first 6 Infinity Stones defined the course of the first decade of the MCU, and we watched as these weapons of mass destruction and creation traded hands as the years went on. We know that Thanos of Earth 838 got partway through his quest to collect the gems, and their unification aided Infinity Ultron in becoming one of the most formidable entities in the entire multiverse. While we got vague allusions to their creation and formation throughout several chapters of the MCU timeline, there was never a firm explanation or origin story given to us about these ancient powerful relics. We can trace down some of the most notable users of each of the stones, but we have yet to see any hint, any inkling that the 7th Infinity Stone even exists in MCU canon. Odin seemed to know a considerable amount about the stones, as did Wong and the scholars of Kamartaj, but none of them were actually present for the creation of the Infinity Stones themselves. If it does, however, then how might it end up being introduced? What is the 7th stone and where is it? Well, today, let's talk about the power of the elusive 7th Infinity Stone. In Marvel Comics, the Infinity Stones are not in fact stones, but were initially referred to as Soul Gems, or later as Infinity Gems. And while the coloration and appearance varies slightly between the comics and the MCU, the gems and the stones largely behave the same way. Today though, they're more widely referred to as the Infinity Stones. Since the Ego Stone or the 7th Stone mainly exists in comic continuity, however, we will be referring to them primarily as gems for the purposes of this video. In the MCU, Wong tells Tony Stark that the Big Bang is what sent the 6 elemental crystals hurtling across the universe, but in the comics, the origin is much different. In comics continuity, one of the first beings in existence was known as Nemesis, the embodiment of anything and everything, the primordial entity who existed before everything else. And Nemesis was the one who was the most powerful entity in the entire universe. This being said, however, he was alone in a time before creation, and at the dawn of the very first cosmos, and upon succumbing to severe loneliness and intense isolation, Nemesis self-deleted. This sent the fragments of her remains across the universe in the forms of the 6 Infinity Gems, and most of Nemesis's essence expanded into what we currently know as the universe. For reference, this gave way to the age of reality known as the First Cosmos, and most of the main comic continuity takes place in the 7th Cosmos, otherwise known as the 7th Multiverse. This paints just how far back in the timeline these events happened, at the very dawn of time and space itself. It's entirely possible that in the MCU, the death of Nemesis was the catalyst for the Big Bang, and if the Marvel Universe ever decides to delve further into the history and the creation of the stones, then they could explore Nemesis. What we as humans understand as the Big Bang may have actually been the death of one of the most ancient entities in the cosmos, and this would be a fascinating event to depict on screen, especially given the multiversal cycle of death and repair that we're seeing played out now. In the comics, each of these gems represented an aspect of the primordial being's incredible power, and the wielders of these gems had the ability to tap into these cosmic forces. These essential aspects of existence then became foundations for the known universe, and each of the 6 principal Infinity Stones served as the embodiment of the being's intense physical power. But while the 6 most likely known gems controlled the aspect of Nemesis's physical power, the 7th Infinity Gem, known as the Ego Gem, housed the remains of her mental state. Her very consciousness, her psyche, and the fragments of her consciousness that remained were contained in this ever-elusive 7th Gem. This gem was hidden away in a parallel universe known as the Ultraverse, and has a certain sense of malevolence to it. Throughout the course of the MCU, the stones have been shown to have latent levels of general cosmic awareness, and the ability to communicate with one another, even if this doesn't amount to full consciousness. The Tesseract banished the Red Skull to Vormir, the Soul Stone demands sacrifices from those who would wield it, and the Mind Stone has lent its power to the creation of Ultron and Vision, seemingly being the driving factor behind their consciousness. These all show signs that the Infinity Stones are somewhat sentient, at least on some level. But in the comics, the Ego Gem shows more signs of complete entity than the rest of the gems. The Ego Stone has a long history embedding itself in the heads of its subjects, and subjecting them to a tame form of mind control, driving their actions, and looking like a parasite, driving them towards oftentimes unknown goals only known to the gem. A host could be subjected to mental supplementation, with their strongest personality traits merging with the motivations of the gem. The Mind Stone grants a wielder influence over sentience, but the Ego Gem itself is sentient. While the whispers of a host's consciousness would echo in their minds, and they largely maintain their free will. When Cersei traversed into the Ultraverse during her own multiversal adventure, her link to Earth 616 as well as the proficiency in sorcery meant that she had a particular sensitivity to the calls of the Ego Gem. We do know that Cersei is not only present in the MCU now, but that the multiverse is quite literally an infinite web of different possible universes. Right now we've seen the quantum realm, the utopian parallel, and we know that spaces like the negative zone are probably out there somewhere, even if we haven't been exploring them yet. So an MCU adaptation of the Ultraverse is not a crazy idea at all. What's particularly interesting about the Ego Gem, however, is that this is the last piece needed to completely resurrect Nemesis. The reason why the 6 stones are able to be collected without resurrecting Nemesis is because they are missing the Ego Gem. But with the main 6, someone like Thanos still has almost complete control over the universe in total. With the Ego Gem though, and the rest of the set, Nemesis can and has returned in the past. And since we know that the Infinity Stones exist on their timelines, then this indicates that variants of Nemesis may exist as well. Until now, we haven't seen any universe reference the Ego Gem, and it would be interesting to learn that there might only be one in the entirety of the multiverse. So whenever the gem is united with the rest of the set of stones, Nemesis could return. This of course is just speculative right now, and we don't have any direct evidence that the Ego Gem even exists in the MCU. Whether it is Cersei or someone like Doctor Strange though, the history of the Ego Gem being lost in a parallel reality may serve as inspiration for a story arc in the near future of the MCU, even if it doesn't have the same wide-reaching ramifications on the level that the other 6 stones had. It could still make for a compelling tie-in to the MCU's past. Whether this comes about in Doctor Strange 3 or something during or after Secret Wars, this could be an interesting idea to explore in future stories. We know that Secret Wars is going to see the multiverse begin to be destroyed and then rebuilt, essentially creating a new Big Bang. So if there was ever a time to explore the beginnings of creation, it might be while the heroes of the MCU are trying to restart creation itself. At the end of the story arc in the comics, the Ego Gem was destroyed, and the remaining fragments of its sentience that was once held were divided among the original gems. So if the Ego Gem no longer exists in the MCU, then this could explain the latent level of sentience that the rest of the stones seem to possess. It could be a result of the Ego Gem granting a small amount of consciousness to the rest of the 6 stones at some point in the distant past. If this is the case, then the Ego Gem may have been destroyed a long time ago. But we know that alternate universes and time travel does exist in the MCU, so time will only tell if the Ego Gem is set to make an appearance down the line sometime. But anyway guys, what do you think of the interesting little facet of Marvel Comics lore? Do you think that the Ego Stone exists, or did exist at some point in the MCU? And if so, where was it during Thanos' quest? Has it already been destroyed? And does this explain why the stones seem to have a certain level of wisdom, or even sentience to them? Would another universe potentially have an Ego Gem, or rather, an Ego Stone? And if so, could we see the return of Nemesis at some point in the future? As always my friends, thank you so much for watching the channel. Hulk smash that subscribe button for more Marvel lore, MCU, and comics, and have a great day.